So on Wednesday, we were looking at statement 11 of chapter 6, where again, Kyoba Rinpoche is emphasizing the importance of understanding that the 10 non-virtues, in summary, of course, non-virtues is not just 10 things. The main ones are the 10 non-virtues. There's all kinds of combination of that produces the 84,000 non-virtues. But in summary, the 10 non-virtues, So to accept, meaning to practice the 10 virtues and to abandon the 10 non-virtues. That is at the heart, at the core of what Buddha taught. So then in terms of conduct, and here there is a particular context to this, because especially, because in the Tibetan tradition, the tradition of Vajrayana with the Mahasiddhas of Vajrayana is a very central element of Tibetan Buddhism. So from the life stories of these Mahasiddhas, it tends to be very dramatic, very kind of outrageous even. Their behavior is kind of hard to understand. So there's a lot of, in some ways you could say, excitement, And some scholars, secular scholars, not like traditional religious scholars, but secular scholars have said, in part, Buddhism was able to establish itself in Tibet. In part is because of the attractiveness of all these, outrageous, powerful stories of the Mahasiddhas. Some scholars, some secular scholars speculated and say, if, the form of Buddhism that is taught, and introduced to Tibet is more like, more like Vipassana, or more like, Thich Nhat Hanh's way, then probably most Tibetans are like, oh no, this is ridiculous. Because the Tibetan people are a very fierce, warrior people. They love a good fight, And so Vajrayana has those hooks that hook them in and make them interested. So yes, in Vajrayana, there's a lot of emphasis on magic powers, powers to overcome your enemies, to give you an edge over, to control, to mesmerize, to hook in, all these sorts of things. And this was attractive to the Tibetans. And if you read the history of Buddhism at that early period, even up till the 10th, 11th, 12th century, still many Tibetans are emphasizing the magical aspects of the tradition. And not uncommon to hear in the biographies, to read in the biographies of these lamas even, about magical displays, about rituals being done, to turn back the army, to fight, the enemies, all those things, including in the history of Dragong, there are things like that. So some of the more kind of shocking statements in the Tantra also became very exciting for the Tibetans. And including things that says, when you are Buddha, good and bad is no longer relevant. You have power over everything. Yeah, so that was the context. But this notion of good and bad is no longer relevant or understood in this way, you find actually not just in Vajrayana, even in many of the Zen tradition stories in East Asia, you also hear this expression, beyond good and bad, no longer attached to notions of good and bad. So here in this statement and the commentary of this statement, Kyopa Rinpoche and Kyopa Rinpoche's tradition, Kyopa Rinpoche's spiritual successors, want to emphasize the point that the true meaning of no accepting and abandoning, the true meaning of beyond good and bad is no more having attachment and aversion. Attachment is the accepting part. Aversion is the abandoning part. No more accepting, no more abandoning means no more attachment and aversion. Beyond good and evil means beyond choosing or having preference to, I like this, I don't like this. So one of the famous songs, for example, in the Zen or Chan tradition, there's this famous song called Trusting in the Mind. I was thinking of actually doing a program on that song. And that song is very similar, I feel, to the Mahamudra songs and teachings that we have been translating of Kyopa Rinpoche. In that song, it begins with something like this. It says, the great way is not difficult. The great way is not difficult. The great way here means the path to enlightenment, as well as enlightenment itself. A great way also means enlightenment itself. It says the great way is actually not difficult, except for the existence of good and bad. So if you don't understand that, you interpret that as saying, oh, you can be enlightened if you, like pretend or don't believe or give up, notions of good and bad. But that's a very dangerous understanding. It doesn't mean that. It means the great way is not difficult or without difficulties if you don't get trapped in these labels of like and dislike. Good and bad in that sense. Not ethical conduct, good and bad, but good and bad in terms of, I like this. So the 8 worldly concerns. Over here, this column, we say good. And what is that? Gain, pleasure, praise, and fame. Over here, this column, we say bad. What is it? Loss, pain, blame, and defame. We say bad. So this song says, as long as you have these 2 columns strongly in place, then the great way is filled with difficulties, challenges. Very hard to be free. So this statement here, statement 11 of chapter 6, has the same meaning. Then more specifically here, it says, then if we understand this, then the precious disciplined conduct that the Buddha's example, Buddha Shakyamuni's example, that is truly beyond accepting and abandoning. If you want to know the true example, unfailing example of this state of mahamudra, where it is without the translation here, or beyond accepting and abandoning, look at Buddha Shakyamuni's example and the way he kept the precious disciplined conduct. I've said this in the past, sometimes we get so excited by stories of Tilopa or Naropa or even Milarepa or story of Guru Rinpoche, and we think of the Mahasiddhas, and then we're like, oh, this is like the way to be awake, to be enlightened. So much so that we forgot Buddha Shakyamuni's example. First, follow Buddha Shakyamuni's example. If we cannot follow Buddha Shakyamuni's example, it's a little ridiculous to talk about following later examples. So that's why during the celebration of the anniversary of Kyopa Rinpoche, His Holiness in Taiwan, at the end of his short teaching, he said, first and foremost, he says, practice, teach, follow the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, the essence teachings of the Buddhas. Then, he says, you can follow and advocate the particular lineage and tradition that you have chosen. Then, third, your particular likes and dislikes for your own personal practice. He's really, at that point, he's speaking to all the teachers that are teachers within the Drigong Kagyu. He's reminding us, don't out of promoting your own brand, so to say, damage the tradition or lineage that you are grounded in. And don't, in promoting your lineage or your tradition, damage or ignore the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. So in terms of taking for ourselves example of behaving and conducting ourselves, we have good biographies of Buddha Shakyamuni. Look at that. He never behaved outrageously. His behavior is always blameless. And he also taught his disciples how to be blameless. You don't see Buddha Shakyamuni, in his actual life example, making statements or saying things like, if what you say is true, just say it. Doesn't matter what. No. Also, he says, first criterion for speaking, for example. So these types of teachings he gave, he says, first criterion of speaking is to ask yourself, what you're going to say, is it true or not true? Do you know it to be true or not true? If you know it to be not true, just don't say it. Don't even say it, he says. He did not say, oh, you can say it if you're trying to save someone. He didn't say that, in his life example. He said, just don't say it, I could imagine if you follow up with a question and say, but what if you're trying to save someone? Then he will say, well, there are other ways of saving someone without involving saying that which is not true. One of my teachers, Khenchen Rinpoche, he says, there's always that example that, in these Buddhist teachings, there's a number of examples that is often used to illustrate, different points, right? And as I said, especially in the Gongchik early commentaries, they tell a lot of stories. Because I think stories have a way of communicating deeper truths that philosophical statements sometimes not very effective. Philosophical statements have the advantage of being very clear, very exact, but also very rigid. Barely ever match with the realities of human beings walking around in all our messiness, you know. But the stories will really show all the messiness and how to, you know, apply the principles. But anyway, yeah, Khenchen Rinpoche, he, you know, I remember he says, you know, so there's this like, oh, you see someone running, right, in great fear, right, running in front of you, runs off somewhere. Then in a little bit, you see someone else, you know, holding a weapon, you know, looking very angry, coming. And then this person stops and asks you, you know, did you see a person running by here, you know, dressed in red, you know, blue jeans, with a black cap, you know, or not? So Rinpoche said, you know, you might think, oh, I better not cause this first person to be harmed. I don't know what's going on. Then you said, oh, no, I didn't see. Or like, oh, yeah, he went that way. Rinpoche said, yeah, that's good that you are thinking, you know, you don't want to harm that guy. But he said, don't immediately resort to telling lies. And if you have to, that should be your last resort. You know, so he said, you can distract this guy, right? I mean, luckily for most of the time, we don't run into these situations, but this is, again, an extreme example. He says, even in this extreme example, you can distract the guy. You're like, oh, you look really tired. Do you want coffee? You want tea? Here, sit down. So the guy's saying, no, I don't want, you know. So he says, there are ways to, you know, don't immediately get in the habit of like lying. Yeah. So Buddha also, this is based on Buddha's life example, you know. He will not, you know, resort to telling lies. Yeah. He will say, he says, so first, you know, whatever you're going to say, you know, do you know it as true or not true? If you know it as not true, don't say it. Then he says, if you know it's true, actually, don't say it yet. There's another consideration, which is it going to help or not? If it is going to help, then he says, say it. If it is not going to help, also don't say it. Even if it passes the truth criterion. Then if it is not helpful, don't say it. Then he says, okay, now let's say it passes the criterion of helpful. Then are you going to say it the right way or not? So if it is truthful, if it is helpful, and you're going to bark it, you know, bark it at someone, don't say it, he says. Don't say it. See, very careful, you know. So he says pleasant. The words used is like pleasant or not. Yeah? So this order is very important. If you mix up this order and start with, is it pleasant or not? Should I say this? Is it pleasant or not? Is it said sweetly or not? You should not start with that. That is not the most important criterion. The most important criterion, do you know it to be true or not true? Then do you know it to be helpful or not? In the end, you don't know, of course, you know, helpful or not, truthful or not, but your conscience, do you know it to be true or not? Do you know it to be helpful or not? And are you going to say it in a way that is proper or not? These are important. And then another criterion is it timely or not? Also. And that's related to the helpful or not. So sometimes you know it will be helpful, and you can say it really well, and you know it to be true, but wrong timing. Also, don't say it. Find a timely time. So much, these kinds of very good advice can be found in the early sutras. In the Pali Canon. Pali Canon tends to focus more on these early sutras. You have time, read some from the Pali Canon. It's very helpful. Mahayana sutras, different style, and sometimes I feel we can get carried away by the more flowery, bombastic. Mahayana sutras are more flowery. Vajrayana tantras is bombastic. And Kyoba Rinpoche always takes us back to, the fundamentals. Yes, so 11, right? So I said I want to look at Sobish's notes. Yeah, so now we're going to do that. If you have the book, it's on page 590. People often say that once one has realized emptiness of mahamudra, one's conduct will be free from accepting virtue and rejecting evil. That's a common one. People say that. Zen people, sometimes you hear them talking about that. And, people who talk a lot about Dzogchen, Mahamudra, they like to say, oh, now you're free from accepting virtue and rejecting evil. The Rinjangma states here that such people claim to maintain a conduct similar to that of, so these are like the wrong things, okay? Rinjangma is pointing out. Outcasts or untouchables from whom there exists no virtue and evil. Yeah? So, there are these people called outcasts or untouchables. They don't think about what is good and what is evil. Or dogs and pigs for whom there is no clean or unclean. Little children for whom there is no shame. Madmen for whom there are no concepts. So there are these people who practice, the higher teachings who will say, now, your behavior should be like an outcast, should be like a pig, should be like a child, should be like a madman. Because it means you have gone beyond all labels, gone beyond all expectations, gone beyond all, social norms. Yeah. Rinchen Chanchup says, they say that there is nothing bad to be abandoned or good to be accepted, and they are running naked in the middle of the village, eating filth as if it were food. These days, they are more skilled, they're no longer, they might still be running around naked, but they're definitely not eating filth. They're eating like very gourmet, fancy stuff, and they say, this is beyond good and evil. It's like, it's beyond good and evil, but give me the best stuff. I'm beyond good and evil, but I have to be served 5-star service. These are the contemporary gone beyond good and evil. As we will see, Jikten Sumgon regards such flaunting of pseudo-yogic conduct as harmful to oneself and others. Regarding the present topic of accepting and abandoning, he maintains that the, quote, precious conduct, unquote, is without accepting and abandoning. But his understanding of what it means to be without accepting and abandoning carries his particular emphasis on disciplined conduct. According to the above quoted view of people, What a realized yogi is supposed to have transcended is the abandonment of non-virtue and the acceptance of virtue. As if non-virtue and virtue have completely lost their value when one has realized emptiness, because emptiness supersedes all values. Again, you hear that, actually you hear that from like very famous teachers teaching today. They do speak like this because, yes, you can find statements like this in the Tantras, in the Doha songs of the Mahasiddhas, but the meaning of this is important to get. So in some ways, it's like, I would say, it's irresponsible to talk like this. But it's very fashionable. It attracts a lot of people. So maybe some of these teachers know what they're doing. Then that's fine. If they know what they're doing, if they know how to, then, hook their students in, so to say. Right? Just like in the introduction of Buddhism to Tibet, great masters that like Guru Rinpoche, yeah, he knows the Tibetans like violent things. So then he uses that to hook them in. Similarly, when I said there are teachers who speak like this, I'm not necessarily criticizing them. Yeah? Sometimes, yes, I will say I am criticizing them, but this is not a blanket criticism. I'm just saying, when you hear statements like this, you please try to remember how Jikten Sumgon will handle this. So for Jikten Sumgon, emptiness does not supersede. Emptiness does not make cause and effect irrelevant. Continuing here. For Jikten Sumgon, disciplined conduct is an essential element of all forms of practice and all stages of the path. He rejects all views in which disciplined conduct could ever or in any way be superseded by a particular view or realization, no matter how advanced the view or realization may be. He maintains that it is always non-virtue that one must not accept, and virtue that one must not abandon, since non-virtue is primordially the thing one must abandon, and virtue is primordially the thing one must accomplish. When one realizes the primordial state of true reality and emptiness, non-virtue is still unwholesome, and virtue still wholesome, since virtue and non-virtue are such through their fundamental nature. Chogi Drakpa too states in the introduction to the present text, introduction to his commentary, the fundamental nature that is like that, where happiness arises from the fundamental own nature of essential virtue, and suffering arises from non-virtuous dispositions, is taught to be exclusivity, about which it is said, from this fundamental nature consisting of a cause, the result arises. Even Buddhists cannot change this. Even Buddhists cannot turn virtuous causes into non-virtuous results, and non-virtuous causes into virtuous results. And samsara and nirvana are therefore the embodiment of virtue and non-virtue respectively. And that embodiment is nothing but this fundamental nature. Shi Bab. The very first Vajra statement of chapter 1. Shi is essence, Bab is the way it plays out. The way it plays out is it follows. The way it plays out is karmically how things play out. The essence does not cancel the way things play out. The way things play out does not contradict the essence. The essence is emptiness. So realizing emptiness doesn't cancel out the workings of cause and effect. What realizing emptiness cancels out is it cancels out our confusion regarding cause and effect. Yeah? Realizing emptiness does not cancel out cause and effect. Realizing emptiness cancels out our confusion regarding cause and effect. Sobish continues, referring to the opinion of certain proponents of great perfection, meaning Dzogchen, and great seal, meaning mahamudra, that, quote, there is nothing bad one must abandon and nothing good one must accept, unquote. Rinzing Chanchup replies that in order to know whether such an attitude is the precious conduct free from accepting and abandoning, it is sufficient to investigate your own mind. So this is very much a style of early Kagyupas. He says, if you really want to know, if this beyond accepting and rejecting means, you no longer think about good, virtue and non-virtue, he says, now look at your own mind, He says, no need to even quote. Well, he doesn't explicitly say this, but in a way it is. He's saying, no need to quote this sutra, this tantra, because, especially now, with a search engine, you can, whoever quotes something, you can counter quote, and you can go until the end of time. You quote one thing, I quote another thing, you quote one thing, I quote another thing, In the Christian tradition, they say, the Bible can, not the Bible, Satan, the devil can quote scripture, chapter and verse, more efficiently than any of you. Because after all, right, the devil's job is to contradict God. So he's going to find every single statement that can cancel out every statement that you make. In our tradition, we don't say the devil. We say your afflictive emotion, So here, Rinchen Chanchu say, you just look at your own mind. So here, the quote from him. Since we are accustomed and familiarized from the very beginning to attachment and aversion, our five sense faculties proceed without any need to make endeavors toward the pleasurable objects, such as the five sense pleasures. Yeah? So here is basically saying, from beginningless time, we have already been mixed up with afflictive emotions, so that we don't need to learn, Quite naturally, our five senses go look for pleasurable objects. One abandons unpleasant objects with aversion. So with attachment, without being taught, our senses gravitate to things that are agreeable and pleasurable. With aversion, without being taught, our senses reject unpleasant objects. So he says, a sloping path is easy. Sloping, downhill path is easy. It is like the downward flow of a river. Such things as the five sense pleasures, which are difficult to abandon, are welcome, saying one must not abandon them. Since it is so very difficult to accomplish the source of temporary and ultimate benefit and happiness that the exalted teacher directly perceived through his gnosis, namely the qualities of precious discipline, conduct, and training, they abandon it. So here his statement is talking about how, look at how, right, easy it is to kind of let our attachment and aversion run our lives. And how difficult it is to follow the example of the Buddha. And in following our attachment and aversion, Have we become more free? In following our attachment and aversion for so long, have we become more free? No, right? In abandoning the example of Buddha, have we become more free? No. Sobish explains here, continues. Thus, in this matter, an investigation of one's mind leads to the conclusion that, due to strong habituation, one is attached to pleasurable objects and averse to unpleasant things. Moreover, to say that one must neither abandon non-virtue nor accept virtue is only self-deception. So the Rinjangma continues. Here, according to the heart intention, meaning the essence of what Kyopa Rinpoche is saying, the training of eliminating and accomplishing, which is the precious discipline conduct, is taught to be the conduct that is without accepting non-virtue and abandoning virtue. It means that the cause and origin of samsara and the lower realms are not allowed to occur. And the path of liberation and nirvana, the precious training, is not abandoned. And that one is without aversion to unpleasant objects and does not abandon them. And likewise, that you are not attached to pleasant objects and try to grasp them. In this way, you're free from grasping and you're free from rejecting. This is the activity of body and speech that is without a mental attitude of attachment and aversion. Sobish unpacks this further. Thus, the intended meaning of accepting and abandoning is to be without attachment to non-virtuous objects and easy activities, and without aversion to virtuous but difficult paths and unpleasant objects. Moreover, this is not only the attitude of the Shravaka, but also of the supreme practitioner of mantra. See, again, often we think, oh, this accepting, abandoning business is only for the Shravaka level, for the Hinayana level. But here it says, no, this is not just for Shravaka level, even mantra level, even secret mantra level. So instead of being attached to good food, the mantra adept offers the inner burnt offering to the mandala of the deity of his body and the three seats. This explanation is also consistent with how Choki Drakpa reads the beginning of the Chakkasamvara basic tantra, reading desired siddhi rather than siddhi of desire. The Hevajra Tantra too teaches that one should not attach oneself in the least to food and beverages, but rather accept whatever one finds. The commentaries illuminate this point with the example of Milarepa, Pamodrupa, and Lamashang. Accordingly, Milarepa merely ate a soup of unsalted nettles picked in the close vicinity of his cave. Pamodrupa abandoned meat and cheese and had only yogurt and vegetable soup. And Lamashang Tselpa once scattered his carefully gathered provisions for his retreat and broke down the cave when he realized how attached he was to the good food and the pleasant dwelling. So Kyopa Rinpoche gave examples of these early Kagyu masters, and said the true meaning of giving up attachment or the true meaning of achieving the state where you do not accept or reject anymore is to be without attachment and aversion. And therefore, 612, view, practice, and conduct are the same. The view, the practice, the conduct. This is a very common, triad. This is a very common three-part rubric: view, practice, and conduct. So this is the title of this chapter. So here, continuing from the statement before, Kyopa Rinpoche is saying, your conduct has to be an extension of your practice, and your practice has to be an extension or the logical implication of having understood the view, having realized the view. And therefore, they have to be the same. In the commentary, the view that is free from extremes and possesses realization, the practice that is free from the two extremes and familiarizes oneself with that realization, and the conduct that is not in contradiction with these two and accords with them, namely the conduct that, as was just explained above, is free from the two extremes of attachment and aversion. These three are in essence inseparable. To practice them is the marvelous, precious, disciplined conduct. So Pamodrupa said, if view, practice, and conduct are complete in a single realization, one obtains the result in this life. Lord Drigungpa, meaning Kyopa Rinpoche, said, the yoga that reaches view, practice, and conduct is one. Therefore, these three, inseparable and without eliminating and establishing, are one view, practice, and conduct, and they are infallible. Moreover, the intention is that even though one might have accepted a view free from extremes, the chance of complete awakening in a practice that does not go beyond subject and object, and the conduct that is under the influence of attachment and aversion, is like a rabbit's horn. Here what it means is, even if you think, oh, I have achieved the view free from extremes, I have realized the view free from extremes, I now understand emptiness. But, he says, if your practice, your meditative practice, is still under the bondage of subject and object, still dualistic, and if your conduct is still driven by attachment and aversion, then the so-called view that you have realized is fantasy. Rabbit's horn, right? Rabbit horns, sky flowers, child of a barren woman, fur of a turtle. These are all examples of things that are fantasy, don't exist. So this is 6.12. Then 6.13, more specifically, Kyopa Rinpoche will say, mahamudra and disciplined conduct. So disciplined conduct is sila. Sila. Mahamudra and disciplined conduct, that mahamudra and disciplined conduct are one. It's an unsurpassed special teaching of Jikten Sumgon. So mahamudra and sila are one. And this is in contrast to people claim that ultimately mahamudra and sila are incompatible. Again, you'll find statements like this in the songs of the Mahasiddhas, where it says, oh, your practice of Shila will just bind you. But it also says your practice of Tantra will bind you. Your practice of bodhicitta will bind you, so on and so forth. But there they are saying, if you don't know how to practice them, they will bind you. But it doesn't mean that mahamudra realization is incompatible with disciplined conduct. mahamudra, and disciplined conduct are one essence. There's a statement that says, later in the Gongchik, related to this, it says, when you realize mahamudra, that realization of mahamudra arises as an understanding of the unmistaken relationship between cause and effect. Yeah, when mahamudra is realized, when emptiness is realized, it is realized as the unmistaken workings, connection between cause and effect. Sila is basically given, or disciplined conduct, ethical conduct, is given based on the principle of cause and effect. This is skillful action, this is unskillful action. Skillful action, Buddha prescribed to us. Unskillful action, Buddha proscribe. Say, don't do this, but do this. Yeah, so how can mahamudra? I mean, the whole point of practicing mahamudra is so that we no longer create non-virtue. And if you say, oh, and as a result of practicing mahamudra, now you can abandon virtue and non-virtue, that's crazy talk. Any questions, comments?
I have a question about this so-called crazy wisdom.
Yes.
People who apparently had much realization, but did not practice discipline, as in the use of alcohol, etc. How do you sort of square that with, from their perspective, not ours, as we view this?
Wait, say that again.
I mean, someone like Trungpa Rinpoche, who apparently taught very profound things, but his conduct was not what we think of as disciplined.
Yes.
How, I mean, not from our perspective viewing this, but from perhaps his perspective, how does one square that kind of conduct if one has a higher level of realization, at least we think he did?
They point to the life stories of the Mahasiddhas and say, they also acted, kind of outrageously to kind of shock people. So the idea of crazy wisdom is like it shocks people out of their complacency, out of their ordinary concepts of, proper or not proper, and this and that.
So it's a method of teaching that is contrary.
Yes, correct. Yes. That they themselves are not affected by it, but it's a method of teaching. Yeah. That's what they say. Is or is not, I think one thing fair to say is or is not, neither you nor I can say definitively, because we are not them, right?
Right.
But I think, having said that, since barely anything we can speak definitively, then speaking provisionally, I would say, no, that's not a good idea. Acting like that or behaving like that, not a good idea.
Easily misunderstood and
Yeah.
considered okay for unrealized people.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
As I said, one time, this is way back when I still don't, it's not yet very clear about kind of Kyoba Rinpoche's, standpoint about these things. I remember saying something like, these crazy wisdom teachers, like contemporary, and they've done a lot of good as well. I said as well, meaning I was saying, yeah, there's, definitely some damage done, but they've done, brought a lot of good, it's with their skillful means. I did not, say any names, just more general statement. But I remember Khenchen Rinpoche making a comment. He says, is it skillful? He just said that. Is it skillful? Yeah, then it's like, oh, wow, yeah. Is it skillful, If you say, oh, that is skillful, as in, if I say that is skillful, as in I say, oh, so and so acted outrageously, attracted a lot of students, and attracted a lot of interest, went on to start, 100 centers, start a university, all of that. Is that skillful in the sense of upaya? Then that's hard to say. Has it created good things? Yes, it has. Has it created suffering? Yes, it also has. So in that sense, I would say it's not upaya. As in skillful means that technical term. As in Buddhas employ skillful means. So even in the story of Captain Compassion, according to Gongchik early commentaries, they say that cannot be an example of skillful. Yeah, it can be an example of compassion. That Captain Compassion did that, his name. But it cannot be used as an example of skillful. According to early Gongchik commentaries, that story, if you want to, it only qualifies as skillful when there's no non-virtue created. So in that case, killing did not occur. Then it's skillful, but otherwise it's not upaya. Upaya as in, a quality that Buddhas have. It says, no, that cannot be. The idea that, but it also, brought a lot of good, like when we talk about situations like this, crazy wisdom, whatever, right? If you frame it differently, right? I think sometimes we take too much the Buddhist brainwashing. Then we forget, like the same people who might say, oh, this is crazy wisdom, this and that, and this and that, they turn around and they criticize like all these stories or situations of like Catholic priests abusing kids, you know. But if you listen to what they talk about, the church's defense, it's very similar. They're like, we're doing the greater good of God's will, blah, blah, blah. So many good things that have come out of this, you know, almost like saying, but so these little things, you know, they call it little. But to me, at least, you know, we're using the same language now, you know, vocabulary might be different. And this is not, you know, to like self-righteously judge. This is actually in the end to warn ourselves and say, don't ever let your practice, and then especially the people who sit on a teaching throne, so to say, or a teaching seat to teach, don't ever let this kind of delusion arise that somehow the teacher is beyond good and bad. That everything the teacher does, you know, is to be skillfully teaching others. Students are encouraged to train their own perception that way. But if the teacher does not forgets that he or she is still a student in relation to someone else, that is when trouble arises. Here in the commentary, Vajra Statement 13, 4 reasons are given as to why mahamudra and disciplined conduct are one. There are 4 reasons. The first is being one in being alike. So mahamudra and sila are certainly one in that they both must know the nature of samsara and nirvana. Because one transmigrates in samsara or wander in samsara owing to not understanding the meaning of samsara and nirvana. Furthermore, they are one in that both abandon grasping of a self and abandon attachment and aversion. Moreover, they are one in that they both are guarded by body, speech, and mind, and so forth. 2, mahamudra and disciplined conduct are one in that they are mutually connected. As Nagarjuna says, it is taught that the rules of conduct are the basis and support of all qualities, just as the earth is the basis and support of everything animate and inanimate. Moreover, it is said, just as here the root of the tree is the main thing, since it is the basis of all the growth and bearing of the fruit, similarly, the Vinaya is taught to be the basis and the root of all dharmas without exception. Third, mahamudra and sila are one in that their function is the same. In general, they are one in that they abandon non-virtue, motivated by the 3 poisons, and accomplish virtuous activities, that is, all the paths. In particular, if one realizes emptiness, they are one through the vital point of emptiness arising as cause and effect. Yeah, that's the statement I was talking about. As it is said, guarding speech and well controlled by the mind, one does not perform non-virtue with the body, and so on and so forth. Since this and so forth has been taught, they are one in abandoning and carrying out activities. Finally, mahamudra and disciplined conduct are one in that their fundamental nature is emptiness. The essence of the Pratimoksha vow is imperceptible form, and mahamudra is free from extremes. Now, this is basically quoting texts to show how they are one. Since this has been taught, they are maintained as one. Moreover, they are without a difference, since it is taught in the sutras that become the disciplined conduct, that because the disciplined conduct is free from the proliferation of mental afflictions, it is the Dharmakaya. So Shila is the Dharmakaya. Furthermore, since it is empty of mental afflictions, it is emptiness. And since it is the purification of mental afflictions, it is natural purity. These terms, natural purity, emptiness, Dharmakaya, these are all terms for like the ultimate state. So here is basically Chodra or Dhammakirti showing how disciplined conduct is another word for Dharmakaya, for emptiness, for natural purity. Sobish's notes, I remember reading this, is very helpful in kind of teasing out the implications of the commentary. Chodra's commentary, I will admit, if you just read the commentary, it sounds like he is not so much presenting you with like a convincing argument, as he is like making statements. It is like this, it is like this, it is like this, it is like this. Yeah. Why is it like this? Because it's stated like this. To be fair, I think if you feel that way, then yes, you're not off track. I read it, it's like, these are like assertions. I would not call his 4 reasons as what we in English, reason implies, some underlying principle is being explained. But here it's more 4 assertions that he's making. But Sobish's notes, quoting from Rinjangma and Dorshema, we'll unpack this section more. So please go over that. And then if you have any questions from going over that, then you can bring up, on Monday. We may or may not go through that ourselves, but you should go over that and bring any questions you might have in Sobish's notes. Then we will go back to chapter 1 on Monday, because now we're talking about qualities, the qualities of the fruit, of the fruition Mahamudra. So, and statement 614 is also about qualities. 14 is about qualities, 15 about qualities, 16 about qualities. Uh, 17 is that statement there. If one has realized emptiness, emptiness emerges as cause and result. That is page 608. That one is very much related to this issue that we've been talking about. And again, there, Sobish provides extensive discussion in his notes on statement 17. So you might want to look at statement 17 as well as you look at Sobish's notes for statement 13 of chapter 6. Statement 13 and statement 17 can be read more closely together, I feel. So 14, 15, 16 is about qualities. And that we will read it alongside chapter 1, 26, statement 26, 27, and I think also 28. Yeah. Any questions, comments?
Hi. Next perfections, we have the perfection of ethical conduct.
Mm-hmm.
That would be what we talk here about, like sila.
Sila is just, and what do you mean perfection of?
Well, we call it in Spanish ethical conduct.
Mm-hmm.
Like we have generosity, patience.
Yeah, yeah.
And
the six perfections, correct?
Yes.
Yes. The second of the six perfections is Shila.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the well, it is like a categorization of the practice, right? So in this context of the six perfections, we have Shila between other five, but they are also intertwined. Like you need to perfectly perform ethical conduct, you need to have samadhi, you need to have mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
So it is like sort of that you cannot do one thing, one of the perfections alone.
Yes.
It is sort of the same flavor that we have here, like view, practice, and conduct are the same.
Yes.
No.
Here, but here, when it's in this context, when it says view, practice, and conduct is the same, it is more in this context emphasizing you cannot claim to have achieved the view if your conduct is still bound up in attachment and aversion.
Okay.
Yeah. Or if your meditation practice, yeah, is still based on subject and object. So it's saying view, meditation, and conduct should have implications on each other. Yeah.
Dr. Lai,
Mm-hmm.
We are imperfect individuals trying to move
Hey,
in
speak
a
for yourself.
Yes, I am. Okay. I am an imperfect individual trying to move in a good direction.
Yes.
And I like the idea of view, practice, and conduct are the same.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it means your advancement is limited by the weakest of those three aspects.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
If you have imperfect view or you're confused about how things are,
mm-hmm.
your practice and conduct have to be imperfect also.
Yes.
If you have a perfect view, but you don't practice and your conduct is bad, then
right. If you think you have perfect view, right.
right, then you have not realized the view.
Correct. Yes.
And whether you have view and practice and your conduct is no good,
yes,
then you have not achieved what you need to. So The more
Exactly.
perfect these things are, the closer to Buddhahood you are becoming.
Correct.
Okay.
If you want to know where you are, you look at the weakest, as you
The
put
weakest, yes.
it, of these three.
Don't strike at them, but try to improve them.
Yes, don't strike at them, like Lo Zhong says. Don't strike at the weakest point, but look at the weakest point, you know. Before you get too carried away and say, oh, my meditative practice, you know, is so stable, right? And you think no subject and object, right? But then, you know, once you come out of
Go on,
that,
scream
you're like,
at everybody.
yeah, you're like, you know, God, that pizza sucks. You know, who ordered that? I hate this.
Right.
Now you know where you are, you know?
Yeah.
You're superficial, like no subject object meditation. Nonsense. And for us, you know, because we are, I can say, you know, we're very well educated, we're very intelligent. So of the three, the most dangerous, I will say, the most dangerous one that can mislead us is view. I feel like getting overconfident over view, because we're very crafty here, you know. Our view often exceeds our conduct and our practice. So be careful. Yeah, so I've become very personally very suspicious of, you know, the approach of keep telling people the view, the view, the view, the view, the view, the view. There was a time that was very exciting to me. I don't know if this is getting more enlightened or getting old. It could just be getting old, you know, and turning grumpy. But the view, you know, it's so exciting, you know, because I think in some ways it feeds our delusions. All this talk about the view, you know, like Jesus says, right? By their fruits you shall know them. That means look at their conduct, you know, then you know how great their view is. Changchu Samchu Rinpoche Ma Ge Ba Nam Ge Gyurche Ge Ba Nyam Ba Me Ba Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Bel War Shu.
Terima kasih.